You have probably seen the image 1,000 times. A massive tower reaching into the clouds, people scattering in confusion, languages suddenly scrambling. And you probably filed it away in your memory as one of those ancient Bible stories that sounds more like a myth than a message. But here is what most people never stop to ask. Why? Why would God interrupt something humans were building? Why would he confuse their language? And what does a half-finished tower in ancient Mesopotamia have to do with your life right now? Because what the Bible actually reveals about the Tower of Babel goes much deeper than a story about construction being shut down. Let us start at the beginning. Genesis chapter 11 opens with a single, striking detail. The whole earth had one language and the same words. One language. Scholars like John Walton, a prominent Old Testament professor at Wheaton College, point out that this opening line is not just background information. It is a signal. A unified language in the ancient world meant a unified identity. It meant coordination, shared purpose, shared meaning. And in the generations after the flood, that shared language became the foundation for something the human family had never attempted before. They migrated eastward and settled in a plain in the land of Shinar. That is Babylon. That is the heartland of what would become one of history's most powerful empires. And there, on that flat and fertile plain, they made a decision together. "Come," they said, "let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves." That sentence. Stop there, because everything important is in that sentence. In the ancient Near Eastern world, a tower with its top in the heavens was not a metaphor for ambition. It was an architectural reality. These were ziggurats, massive stepped temple towers that ancient civilizations like the Sumerians and Babylonians built as the physical meeting point between Earth and the divine realm above it. Theologian and author Tim Keller writes that the ziggurat was essentially humanity's attempt to build a staircase to God, a structure where the gods could descend to meet the priests, or where the priests could ascend to the realm of the divine. So the people of Shinar were not just building a skyscraper, they were building a sacred machine, a religious technology designed to bring heaven down on their terms. And listen to the driving motive again. Let us make a name for ourselves. That phrase, in the original Hebrew, is nakedly ambitious. To make a name was to claim power, prestige, and permanence. In a world without legacy, without digital memory, without stone monuments to your achievements, your name was everything. Your name was your lasting mark on the world. And these people wanted that mark carved into the sky itself. Here is what scholar and theologian N.T. Wright observes about this passage. He notes that the sin of Babel is not that humans dreamed big, it is that they dreamed inward. Their ambition circled back on themselves, their city, their tower, their name, their safety. The words "their" and "themselves" appear over and over in those original verses. This was not humanity reaching toward God. This was humanity constructing a system to make God unnecessary while borrowing his address. And then something remarkable happens. God comes down. Notice the deliberate irony in the text. They built a tower to reach the heavens, and yet God still has to come down to see it. The tower they imagined as a cosmic skyscraper barely registers in the divine view. The text is almost gently mocking their scale. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. But here is what most people miss. God does not come down angry. He comes down observant. He assesses the situation. And then he says something that should stop you cold. Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Read that again. God is not saying they are evil. He's not saying they are broken. He's saying they are unified. And in their unity, nothing they imagine will be beyond their reach. This is not a warning about human wickedness. This is an assessment of human potential unleashed in the wrong direction. And so God scatters them. He confuses their language. And the great building project collapses not from earthquake or storm, but from the simple inability to communicate. Now you might ask the question that hangs over this entire story. Was that cruel? Was God afraid? Was he threatened by what humans could accomplish? John Walton addresses this directly in his work on ancient Near Eastern thought. He argues that God's response at Babel was not punitive judgment in the classic sense. It was redirection. The people of Shinar had settled. They had refused to spread out and fill the earth as God had commanded after the flood. They were building permanence in one place, centered on themselves. God's scattering was not punishment for achievement. It was the enforcing of a design that they were actively resisting. Think about what the diversity of human civilization has produced. Science, art, literature, music, engineering, philosophy. The multiplication of human cultures across the globe did not impoverish humanity. It exploded it. The diaspora that began at Babel seeded the entire world with image-bearers of God, each culture carrying a fragment of human creativity into every corner of the earth. But there is a deeper layer still. If you trace the arc of the entire Bible, something stunning emerges. Babel is not the end of the language story, it is the middle of it. Because in Acts chapter 2, something happens in Jerusalem that should send a shiver through anyone who remembers Genesis 11. The disciples are gathered. Wind fills the room. Fire appears above their heads. And they begin speaking in other tongues. And people from every nation under heaven hear them, each in their own language. Do you see it? At Babel, one language was broken into many, and humanity was scattered. At Pentecost, many languages were gathered into one moment of understanding, and humanity was called together. Theologian G.K. Beale, in his work on biblical theology, calls Pentecost the reversal of Babel. The curse of confusion was not permanent. It was a waiting room. The very thing that scattered the human family was now being addressed by the Spirit of God moving through the languages of every nation. Not by erasing the diversity, but by speaking into it. Not by forcing everyone back into one tongue, but by allowing the one message to be heard in every tongue simultaneously. This is where the Tower of Babel stops being an ancient footnote and starts being a mirror. Because the instinct of Babel is not ancient, it is yours. It is the drive to build a life where you are the center, where your name, your security, your comfort, your legacy are the tower being erected brick by brick. The project where you manage your relationship with whatever higher power you acknowledge on your own terms. The system carefully designed so that God, if he exists, is invited to endorse your plans rather than disrupt them. That is Babel. And the bricks are everywhere, in careers built to outlast us, in identities constructed to impress, in communities that circle inward rather than scatter outward with purpose. And the question God asks at Shinar is the same question he asks now. Not what are you building, but who is it for? The tower never reached heaven, not because humans were incapable, but because the destination was wrong. Heaven was never a location to be conquered. It was a relationship to be entered. You began hearing this story as a myth about an ancient building. But what the Bible actually reveals goes much deeper, because the tower was never about height. It was about direction. And the God who came down to scatter the builders of Babel is the same God who came down in flesh at Bethlehem. Not to confuse, not to destroy, but to give you a name that no tower could ever reach and no language could ever fully contain. The whole earth had one language once. And one day, according to the book of Revelation, every nation and tribe and tongue will gather around a single throne again. Not because they climbed high enough, but because someone descended far enough.